I just wanted to say that we are lucky that we are here in North America at this time, this age, because it's really not a question of that saying that. It is different throughout the history that women were weaker physically, therefore, and having the attribute of feminine to have and bear children, and then put into the role model, and that stepped out of it, they were punished. It's very severely sometimes, even burned, like witches. Anyhow, it's easier now to say, and we talk about it, and we try to raise our children, and I have 3 daughters and raise them up, not to think about the gender. I just think that we are very lucky at this time and age that we can make a choice. The question is, how do you see this progressing from this point on? Not only in North America, but the rest of the world.
Thank you very much for getting up and talking on the microphone, because that was an important message that I think I'm glad everyone read. Thank you. You know, sometimes it's discouraging, right? It's so much better for us in North America than it is almost anywhere in the world, and yet we still look at the inequities that we have. I feel like ever since I retired that this has been my mission. I have blogged about women, and the inequities in the system. I started off talking a lot about women, but what was interesting was about 5 years ago, I sat down with a young man who said, you need to be talking to men too. We don't like the model that we've been given that we're supposed to live up to. So that's why when I wrote my book, whole first draft written, and it was all written for women. And because of this young man, I sat down and spent another year and rewrote the book and went back in and found examples for men as well. Because I do think that it's to all of our advantage, both men and women, that we want to work together in a modern workplace, and men want to be able to express themselves as well. And so they feel that they've been put into a box that they don't want to be in. So that's my hope. And I will say that I do get discouraged sometimes. You heard my introduction that I do work as a mentor. It's not uncommon for me to get up in the morning and have an email from someone saying, here's what's happening in my life, what do you recommend? And I email those people back. Last summer, we were in Saskatchewan, and I had a bad cold. Went out for dinner and I just stayed in the hotel room, and I got an email from someone saying, I have a friend that's in a tough position, would you mind talking to her? And I said, no, I'm in the hotel room right now, I have time, have her give me a call. What she went through and what she was telling me about and what was happening to her, have we not made any progress at all? So that was discouraging, but I do think we are making progress. The very fact that we have so many people out and we'll talk about this means that we're making progress. To me, in order to make culture, we need to, the fact that we are here and willing to have the conversation is how we actually make cultural change. And what I find interesting is that I've done a lot of work with engineers, and I find groups to making change. Maybe it's because they're taught to look for alternatives and different solutions. I've got to say, the stereotype about engineers is that they wouldn't be open to this, but I find them very open to this. So I find that very hopeful. I do think that what happens energetically is if you have groups that make change, other groups pay attention and they come along, and especially when they look at North America as a culture that they want to emulate. And there are a lot of cultures in the world that want to emulate us. So as long as we are making those changes, I do think that it helps them because they see our behavior as behavior they want to model. One of the things I'd like to be able to do more with this is, I spend a lot of time with women helping them figure out how to navigate a patriarchal system. And I don't have any, and a lot of that goes along with how they can make changes for themselves to help them adapt to it. I don't have any good answers for actually changing the system, except that I do believe as we get more people, more women in positions of power, it just does naturally change the dynamic. I hope that answers your question.
My name is Lou. I just became a professional engineer this month, so I'm very excited. Thank you. I'm very curious about yourself. So my question will be, when did you realize there's an issue for education like kids based on their gender? And what made you, wake up to start sharing all your information to the public and doing all this kind of stuff? Thank you.
Thank you. So I think that the story I told earlier about the CEO, that had a really big impact on me because when I went to university, I always dated athletes. And I always was interested in hearing them describe how their coaches were managing their teams to get the best performance. So I was always interested in management. And then when I went to work in a company and I watched different managers that I worked for get the most out of their people, that always was fascinating to me. How do they do that? So that was doing things that were different than what was expected of a man in his position, in his industry. And I also realized there was expectations around what was expected of me as a woman working with all these men. So some of the things that I just sort of kept chalking up these different stories of things that happened. So for example, we bought a company. We were very acquisitive. We made a lot of acquisitions at Potash. And we bought a company in southern United States. And these guys did not want to be bought by a Canadian company, especially one from Saskatchewan that they considered to be a bunch of stubble jumpers. And the guys in southern United States that were supposed to report to me were very insulted that they were reporting to a woman. So when I would phone them up to ask a question, I got one-word answers, and if I didn't ask the right question, I didn't get any information at all. My response to that was to try to win them over using very feminine attributes. I got on the plane, I flew them down, I took them for dinner, I tried to charm them and cajole them, and it never worked. A guy who was a mentor to me came into the office and said, "Betty Ann, you have to take them out behind the woodshed and tell them who's boss." Now that's a mining mentality that I didn't grow up with and was also different than a way that women have been conditioned. I took a deep breath, I called a meeting, I got on a plane, I flew down, I read them the Riot Act and told them if they wanted to stay working at the company, it was their choice really, if they wanted to follow along or not. I didn't stay for dinner, I got back on the plane and flew home. It turned everything around. That guy gave me advice about how a man would do it using what I would consider masculine attributes that I didn't feel confident enough or hadn't given myself permission to use until that point. And then after that, actually, they did turn around and we did put out a lot of good work together. But I had to approach them with masculine energy in order, starting with feminine wasn't going to work. And so I started sort of counting up all these different situations that were happening like that. And I could see how often it happened that somebody, and one guy in my office who was very good at using feminine energy, and I used to tease him and call him the Alan Alda. Remember him? He was in a lot of movies, always played a lot of very soft parts. I used to, because I could see that he used feminine energy attributes where a lot of the guys didn't. So it just became something that I became interested in. And I just started studying everything I could find on it, and it became kind of a mission where I would go out and speak on it all the time. And just, it became, I just started seeing the entire world. What's really interesting about it is, you'll see in my book, I've basically taken all these attributes and I've divided them into masculine and feminine, and I have put together a evaluation or an assessment, so you can do a little test and decide whether your natural inclination is to be masculine or feminine, whether you're a man or a woman. So my natural inclination is to use masculine attributes. I have to work hard to use feminine attributes. That probably served me well in the mining business. My kids are in therapy as a result. Seriously though, I mean, it just can't use one energy or the other, and it's important for us to recognize the energy that we're oriented towards. And then we have to recognize that when we're oriented towards that, we can tend to dial it up to the extreme. That can get us in trouble. And so it's really about, I've got a number of exercises in the book that help you. You can try them to develop your opposite energy. And so for me, it's become just something that's, I feel like I have a mission. Thank you. Anybody, I'd like to ask more questions if anybody else.
I think I just want to follow on with that is quite often, especially women, walk a very fine line when they use the masculine traits. Men are seen as strong, confident. Women are seen as angry, hysterical. Mm-hmm. How do we deal with that, and how do we I guess counter that?
That's a great question, thank you, and I wish I had all the answers to that. There's a joke that says, what's the difference between assertive and aggressive? And the answer is gender. So we definitely as women have a narrow margin for error, and I always say it's a patriarchal system designed by men for men. Women have trouble navigating that system. Things that would be considered acceptable that a man does automatically have a negative connotation when a woman does them, so it makes it difficult. I used a sense of humor most of the time to overcome that, because if you can make people laugh, you're constantly finding common ground. If you can both laugh at things together. It's not always funny. It was always my fallback position, was to make a joke, to try to find some way that we could both laugh about it, and then it was a way that we could move ahead. I agree that it is difficult, but you have to go back and think about the Stanford study, where the women need to show the leadership characteristics by showing masculine, because we believe that masculine attributes are interchangeable with leadership. And then the next thing we have to do is, inquire about someone's family, spend time visiting with them. So for example, when I was working in an office, I shared a secretary with a guy. He would walk by, drop something on the desk and say, I need it by 2 o'clock. That was okay for him. If I did that, it would be considered that I was being bossy, pushy, I might have been just as, I had to stop and say, how did the soccer game go last night? Did your kids do well? I know you were worried about your son was okay. And then I would say, and can I get this by 2 o'clock? So we have certain ways that we have to do things in order for it to be acceptable that we're asking. And I wish that I didn't have to give that advice, but I just think it's reality, and it's something that we just have to pay attention to. And there's so many things. I often, I go into law firms and speak maybe to the partners and the managing partners there, and because they're interested in how do they get more women that will stay with the firm long enough to become a partner. And one of the things that I say is you have to understand that when women are sitting around the table, they know that if they talk, their stock goes down. So they therefore will tend not to bring forward their opinions, and they will tend to sit on their hand instead of putting it up. If you're the managing partner of the law firm, you are missing really a lot of good ideas by not having those women speak up. You need to call on them in the meeting and ask them their opinion. First of all, you're going to get more good information, and secondly, you're going to send a signal to all the guys sitting around the table that I think her opinion is important, and that way they will as well. There's just so many things that we need to be doing and thinking about. And so each of us can see us stop ourselves, challenge ourselves. Are we actually falling into something, into stereotypical ideas and bias here? And what can we do to change that? There's a Twitter feed called Man Who Has It All. And basically what he does is he takes every day the advice that's given to women and gives it to men. And it's ridiculous, because you would never expect to tell a man, oh, you can't get it all done, try taking a relaxing bath with candles. All these advice that we give to women, he's giving it to men, or things like, I can't find a man I'm doing a profile on famous people and I can't find any men. Does anybody have any suggestions? So it's just kind of like every time that you say something, stop and flip the script. And if you flip the script and it sounds ridiculous, you know you're probably falling into stereotyping. And that's all we can do is try to make ourselves more aware, bless you. That's all we can do is make ourselves more aware. I hope that answers your question. Yes?
Thank you. Great talk, by the way.
Thank you.
Quick question. First of all, the cultural representation of different genders are completely out of whack. I agree with you. But how about, it seems to me from your talk that you're more focusing on making a phase shift from the feminine energy to the masculine energy. How about the feminine energy? Where do you see it fit? Where does it thrive? Because we can't, as a society, we need both energies, right?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So if I made it sound like I thought masculine energy was more important, maybe it's because I so often talk to women who are needing to develop more masculine because they've been programmed their whole lives to be using more feminine. But I really think it's important for men and for people like me to use more feminine energy. And there's a whole lot of things that we can do. And it's so important, especially in the international business environment, because when you're dealing with different cultures, it means that you need to be very other-oriented. Feminine energy is really about thinking about the collective and making sure that people work well together. It's like the Lone Ranger is the masculine energy. He's the guy that's sitting up on the hillside all by himself. He has his gun. He doesn't have anybody that can actually keep watch for him. He has to do it all himself because he's so independent. Feminine energy is like the wagon train where everybody travels together, and there's the protection